Hey there, guys, and welcome to another episode today of the MH Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Miles Harrison, and today we're going to be training. We are going to be going through whether you should be training to failure. I think a lot of people get this wrong in our industry. I think a lot of people like to really train to failure because it means that you're pushing hard, you're absolutely maxing yourself out. But is it actually necessary? Can we get more results with doing less? So this is what we're going to be going through in today's episode of the podcast. So if you guys are ready, let's get to it. So there's two types of failure. There's technical failure and there's absolute failure. Technical failure is when you break down in technique. It's when you can't perform a certain skill and that technique breaks down. Now, when you're a beginner, you can't really reach absolute failure. And the reason why that is because you're brand new, in the sense of you've never worked at higher intensities before. You don't know particularly movements that well. When you're starting to get fatigued, you don't fully understand how to kind of fight those type of loads. So technique tends to break down a lot easier compared to someone who's a little bit more experienced, understand how to manage themselves under load when they're fatigued, before they go to anything of absolutely maximal failure or muscular failure or anything like that. So we'll brush that across. When it comes to absolute failure, it is in the name. You can't do any more. You are literally at your limit. Now, the big question. Do we need to actually go into absolute failure to get results? Short answer, no we don't. There are plenty of research that shows that regardless of what type of training you're doing, whether you're doing training for hypertrophy, strength, power, speed, you don't need to go to failure. In fact, depending on what type of training you're doing, the more you have to shy away and stay away from failure. So, for example, when it comes to power and speed, that's probably the furthest away you need to go when it comes to training failure. One, because especially when it comes to power, both really, like you need to be working fast. You need to be getting those highly neurological stimulus to improve those adaptations. So you need the bar to be moving quick. You need to be able to be fully rested so you can actually get them peak heights. If you're under fatigue, or the bar starts slowing down quite drastically, so you're starting to actually really grind through the reps, you're not training power, you're more likely training strength, and you're probably also training hypertrophy as well. That's that. You need to make sure that you're fresh. You need to be able to move the bar quick to order to get those adaptations. As we start moving along towards strength and hypertrophy, the research actually shows that you actually do need to get quite close to failure, but you don't need to keep going to absolute failure. The thing with absolute failure is the fact that it elicits a hell of a lot of fatigue. And if you keep trying to achieve a high level of fatigue, one, you're going to create too much of a depth for the recovery point. So you need more time to recover, which means that you're going to be doing less training, which means that you're going to get a less type of stimulus, which means that you're going to get less adaptations. Also as well, if you're not able to recover and you still try to train that on top of all that, you're probably not going to be able to reach those type of peaks again, and therefore not get enough stimulus to actually improve. If anything, you're going to get a little bit more in depth. Hypertrophy. You need to train quite close to failure to achieve mechanical tension, which is the main driver of hypertrophy, which is technically muscular failure. But, like I just said again, if we're constantly chasing fatigue, whether we're using things like kind of like drop sets, short rest periods, we're not going to be able to have a high enough output to create that type of stimulus. And I think that's really quite key. A lot of the time that people put high efforts as the forefront of what matters. So if you go into the gym and you're constantly chasing fatigue, if you're constantly chasing absolute failure, it's great for the short term because you feel like you've done enough, you get the endurance, you get the pump, all that type of stuff. But what happens over long term is you just can't stand that level of fatigue and you just can't recover from it. And because of that, your training effort goes down the drain and therefore you just don't get the results that you want. So what I would always recommend, regardless of what level of experience you are, most of the time you want to be short of maybe 2-3 reps in reserve, especially when we're looking at things like hypertrophy and strength. When it comes to power and speed, generally, it's a bit hard to say. Maybe if you're using like a velocity monitor, you could probably say something like 20 to 30% of a drop. But if you're not really got those type of tools, then the moment you feel like you can't exert a high level of speed into the bar, then you need to either have more rest, also I'd say a bigger rest period in between your sets, or that's it. That's when you cut the training. Because again, if you're, and this is going into kind of power and speed training in the sense of if you can't move the bar quick and your reps feel sluggish, you need to stop. You're not training that adaptation no more. You're more training a capacity style of training where you're improving strength, and that's it. You're probably just creating more fatigue for no reason. Now, if you're a little bit more on the beginner side, this is where it's going to start looking a little bit of a muddy water. And the reason why I say that is because absolute failure and technical failure are going to be, they're going to look quite the same. Because, again, because your technique breaks down so easily, the likelihood you reach those peaks is going to be a lot higher. But the fact that, like I mentioned before, the fact that you can't maintain those positions or your technique for long probably means that you'll probably shine away from muscular failure. But because you're already quite new to training and you're getting new to these positions and techniques, you'll probably find that you'll need a good level of recovery as well. So, here's my recommendation. When it comes to being a beginner or learning a new skill, you need to be shying away from, so you need to be going to technical failure and shying away from absolute failure. Once you become a little bit more experienced and you've got better at the skill of managing yourself under load, under fatigue, then you can start going a little bit closer to absolute failure because you can do that. But most of the time, you want to be shying away from it. And this also goes for the matter of people who are doing sports. If you're someone who's in season training, and the likelihood of when you're in season training, you're going to have other practices, you're going to have matches, you're going to have probably days in your schedule where you're doing double types of training, then you need to stay away from failure as well. Because what you're trying to do is literally the minimal effective dose. You're trying to get the biggest bang for your buck without so much of a debt. When it comes to the off season though, and you don't have those type of schedules, you can probably go a little bit more closer to failure, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to increase your peak, but you don't have to worry about needing that maximum capacity for a training session or a match. So you can actually quite go to failure quite often. if you're an actual strength athlete, you're probably going to be spending the most amount of time in those failure points, because one, you actually need to get better at the skill of going towards doubles and singles of that lift. But if you actually ask anyone who does that type of training, they also have periods where they do excuse me, times where they are quite shying away from failure because they're getting the repetitions in. They need more volume. And that's the thing about training to failure as well. Like, the harder you generally train, the less volume, not only that you can handle, but then you actually need to do. So if you are training multiple times within the day, multiple times within the week, you're probably not going to want to go really close to failure, because you're just not going to be able to fit all that type of volume in. And that goes in, obviously, the discussion then, do you need that much volume, which I'm not going to go into, because that's a rabbit hole for another day, really, and stuff. So yeah, so I hope I've kind of cleared up when you should kind of ideally go to failure and when you're not. I think majority of the time, for most people, you can get away from not training to failure, close to it, but not to it. I think there's a lot of I'll not rephrase that, but I'll just make another point in the sense of, I think a lot of people want to push themselves to the new limit. I think that's a really good thing to have. I think if I was someone, I'd rather be someone who absolutely pushes themselves to the max rather than leaving something on the table. But naming the factors I've already just mentioned about before, I can't keep doing that. And it's probably not sensible for me to do that, because even though I probably could train to absolute failure with the experience that I've had in the gym, one, the fact that I've trained for a long period of time and I can handle quite a bit of weight, I'm going to need a lot of recovery for doing that weight, because it's a lot of load. And also as well, if I was constantly chasing fatigue, I probably wouldn't be able to get those peaks again. I'd probably be fatigued going back into more sessions, and I wouldn't be able to get the stimulus that I wanted, which then would obviously lead into more of a recovery debt, which means that I wouldn't be able to perform my sport or actually train. So those things I want you to also consider when it comes to training to failure. But I think that's it. I think I've generally covered a quite easy thing to understand when it comes to training to failure. If you guys have any questions on whether you should be training to failure, when's the right time to be kind of training to failure, that I maybe haven't now covered in this episode of the podcast, just drop me a message and we can have that conversation. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the podcast. If you do like it, make sure you give it share it with your friends and family. Make sure you give it a 5-star of the podcast. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Enjoy yourself.